Every horoscope traces to Enoch, chapter 8, verse 3. The scribes named the teacher. The Book of Enoch was removed from the Bible by the Council of Laodicea in 364. The church banned it, hid it, and called it dangerous. When the Dead Sea Scrolls surfaced at Qumran in 1947, Barakajal was in the oldest fragment. Chapter 8 names his craft and shows why it still works. You will hear his Aramaic name and why every horoscope runs on it. Hit subscribe if forbidden biblical history fascinates you. If you open Genesis chapter 6, all you get is this. In 6 short lines, the sons of God see that the daughters of men are fair. They take wives for themselves. Their children become the giants of old, men of renown, and then the story moves on. The verse never names one of the sons of God. Not one of them is identified. Genesis knows the crime was committed, but Genesis does not know who committed it. Deuteronomy is where the Bible actually forbids what this episode is about. In chapter 18, verses 10 through 12, the text reads, "Do not let anyone be found among you who practices divination, or interprets omens, or is a soothsayer or a diviner." The Torah forbids the craft, but it does not tell you where the craft came from. That is the gap the older Jewish tradition tried to close. Genesis names the sin. Deuteronomy names the prohibition. Neither of them names the teacher who first put the star chart in a human hand and told that human being what it meant. For that name, you have to leave the Bible you were handed and open a book that was cut out of it. And that book gives you a single verse. Only 9 words in the Robert Henry Charles translation of 1912. It names the watcher and it names his craft. But the older Jewish tradition was not nearly so restrained, and the reason we can read that tradition at all is a story worth telling. In 1773, a Scottish explorer named James Bruce was returning to Europe after 5 years in the Ethiopian highlands. He had been trying to trace the source of the Blue Nile. What he actually accomplished was smaller and larger at the same time. He came back with 3 complete copies of the Book of Enoch in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language of Ethiopian Christianity. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church had never stopped reading it. The Western churches had simply forgotten. Bruce deposited a copy at the Bodleian Library at Oxford, where it sat largely ignored for nearly 50 years. In 1821, an Oxford professor named Richard Lawrence finally translated it into English. In 1912, Charles produced the Standard Critical Edition, published by Oxford University Press. He worked from Ge'ez, Aramaic, and Greek fragments simultaneously. When I quote from 1st Enoch in this episode, I am quoting from Charles. But Charles was working with the Ethiopic tradition, which is the youngest surviving version of the text. The oldest version goes back further. In 1952, 5 years after the first scrolls came out of the cliffs above the Dead Sea, Bedouin of the Ta'amare tribe found the cave that scholars label Cave 4. It sits within sight of the ruined settlement of Qumran, and it held the wreckage of a library, roughly 15,000 fragments from more than 500 manuscripts. Among them were 11 fragmentary Aramaic copies of the Book of Enoch. Paleographers date the oldest, cataloged as Fragment 4 Q201, to roughly 200 years before Christ. That is older than Christianity and older than almost every surviving manuscript of the Hebrew Bible. The man who eventually reassembled these fragments was a Polish priest named Joseph Mielik, in his volume, The Books of Enoch. Aramaic fragments of Qumran. Cave 4, published by Oxford's Clarendon Press in 1976, remains the foundation of the field. 2 traditions carry the text forward. The Ge'ez preserve the story. The Aramaic preserve the earliest form of the name. Between them, the pattern is real. The reading is his. So here is what the text says. There are 2 passages, both from Charles in 1912. The first is the muster roll of chapter 6. The Book of Enoch opens with a heavenly conspiracy in which 200 angels, sent to watch over humanity, decide to break their orders. Semjaza, their chief, is afraid to sin alone, So he gathers them on the summit of Mount Hermon and makes them all swear a mutual oath. And then the scribe lists them by name, 20 of them, the chiefs of tens. Charles renders it this way. These are the names of their leaders. Their leader was Semiazaz, then Arakiba, Ramiel, Kokabiel, Tamiel, Ramiel, Danel, Ezekiel, Barakijal, Asael, Armaros, Badarel, Ananel, Zachiel, Samsapil, Sadarel, Turel, Jumjel, and Sariel. These were the chiefs of tens. Barakijal is listed ninth. He is not the leader. He is not a marquee name. He is one of 20. But when chapter 8 starts assigning the teachings, chapter 8 singles him out. Here is verse 3, exactly as Charles rendered it in 1912. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cuttings, Armaros the resolving of enchantments, Barakijal astrology, Kokabal the constellations, Ezekiel the knowledge of the clouds, Arakiel the signs of the earth, Shamsiel the signs of the sun, and Sariel the course of the moon. That is 1 Enoch chapter 8, verse 3, exactly as Charles rendered it. In the Aramaic Qumran fragments that Milik reconstructed, the name appears in a slightly older form. Not Barakijal, but Barakel. The Nickelsburg commentary of 2001 notes that the shorter form is closer to the original Hebrew and Aramaic root. Barak means lightning, and El means God, so the full name translates as lightning of God. The watcher, whose name is a bolt out of the sky, is the one the scribe assigns to reading the sky. Now look at what the list actually is, because the order matters. Chapter 8, verse 3 is not a random inventory of forbidden arts. The scribe is being surgical. He divides sky reading into 6 distinct crafts and gives each of them its own teacher. Barakijal gets astrology, the interpretive layer, the reading of fate. Kokabal gets the constellations, the map underneath. Ezekiel gets the knowledge of the clouds. Arakiel gets the signs of the earth. Shamsiel gets the signs of the sun, and Sariel gets the course of the moon. That is 6 teachers for what a modern person would call one subject. That is because to the scribe, they were not one subject. Looking at the sky is not the same as reading the sky. Reading the sky for weather is not the same as reading the sky for destiny. He grades them separately, and the one he places at the head of the group, before the star charts and the cloud signs and the sun and the moon, is Barakijal, the astrologer, the one who assigns meaning. Which brings us to the strangest fact about the Book of Enoch. The same composite text that condemns Barakijal for teaching astrology contains, in chapters 72 through 82, a long treatise on the exact motion of the sun and the moon. It is called the Book of the Luminaries. The archangel Uriel personally shows it to Enoch. Uriel reveals the 364-day solar calendar, the 12 gates through which the sun rises and sets, the phases of the moon, and the length of days across the seasons. That astronomy is not forbidden. It is angelic. It is licit. The Qumran community used exactly this calendar to organize their worship. So the same book that forbids reading the sky also gives you a 364-day solar calendar. The line the scribe is drawing is not between looking up and looking down. It is between what you can observe and what you claim to see. The pattern is real. The reading is his. That distinction is worth sitting with, because everything the horoscope industry sells today lives on that line. The zodiac is a real map of where the sun sits at different times of year. The 12 signs correspond to 12 stretches of the sky the sun actually crosses. The dates when Mercury is behind the sun from Earth's perspective, what modern astrology calls Mercury retrograde, are real orbital events. The astronomy in the horoscope column is genuine. It has always been genuine. Kokabal handed people a working map. What Barakijal handed them was different. Barakijal handed them the claim that the map speaks about you personally, that where the sun sat when you were born tells you what kind of person you are, and that the retrograde says something about your week. The astronomy is checkable. The interpretation is not. And the interpretation is what the scribe of chapter 8 singles out as the transgression. He does not condemn the observation itself. He condemns the reading of the observation. He does not condemn looking at the sky. He condemns telling people what the sky said about them. The consequences arrive first, before any of the watchers were named individually for punishment, before Azazel got his prison at Dudel, before Semjaza was dragged from his post. The earth itself gave testimony. Chapter 9 opens with the archangels looking down. Charles renders it this way: and then Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel looked down from heaven and saw much blood being shed upon the earth, and all lawlessness being wrought upon the earth. They carry the case to God. They ask for a verdict. They get one. This is where the punishments are handed out. Chapter 10 is the sentencing. Uriel is sent to Noah to warn him. Raphael is sent to Azazel to bind him in Dudel in the desert, under rough and jagged rocks. Gabriel is sent to the giants to make them turn on each other, and Michael is sent to Semjaza in the company he led. Here is Charles again, from chapter 10, verses 11 through 15. Go, bind Semjaza and his associates who have united themselves with women, so as to have defiled themselves with them in all their uncleanness. And when their sons have slain one another, and they have seen the destruction of their beloved ones, bind them fast for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, till the day of their judgment and of their consummation, till the judgment that is forever and ever is consummated. Barakijal is not named in that sentence. He falls under it, but the scribe does not single him out. Unlike Azazel, who gets his own archangel and his own named location, Barakijal disappears into the collective. Michael is told to bind Semjaza's associates. Barakijal is one of the associates. That is his sentence, and it condemns him to the valleys of the earth for 70 generations, until the judgment that lasts forever. That silence is worth naming. The teacher of astrology does not get the star treatment. He does not get a Dudal. He does not get a Raphael. The Prometheus parallel that Western readers reach for, the fire thief bound in the mountains, applies more cleanly to Azazel than to him. Barakijal was bound with the rest. The lesson was not untaught, because here is what happened. The teachers were bound, but the teachings were not. The metallurgy Azazel handed over kept working. The enchantments Semjaza taught kept working. In the astrology Barakijal handed over kept being practiced, kept being written down, kept spreading. Babylonian astrology systematized it. Hellenistic astrology exported it. The medieval Islamic world refined it and passed it back to Europe. And in every stage of that transmission, the underlying craft was doing exactly what Barakijal was condemned for, which is reading a fate from the sky's motion. The teacher was bound with the rest. The pattern was real. The reading was his. The fingerprint you can see today runs through two moments almost 2,000 years apart, and both of them anchor to Barakijal's chapter directly. The first is a Carthaginian theologian named Tertullian. Writing around the year 200 in a treatise called On the Apparel of Women, he traces the arts of cosmetics, metallurgy, and astrology directly to the fallen angels. He is pulling straight from the Greek version of Enoch chapters 7 and 8. And in another treatise on idolatry, chapter 9, he attacks astrology specifically as a watcher-taught craft, and he tells Christians to abandon it for exactly that reason. That is the earliest documented Christian argument against astrology, and the argument runs through Barakijal. It is 1,800 years old. It did not stop the practice. The industry Tertullian was arguing against in the 2nd century was already too old to argue with, and here is why. The pattern was real, and the reading was his. Tertullian could dismantle the reading, but he could not dismantle the sky. The second moment is more recent and closer to home. On the 21st of August, 1930, a princess named Margaret Rose was born at Glamis Castle in Scotland. 3 days later, the editor of the Sunday Express in London, a man named John Gordon, needed a story. He called the most famous astrologer of the day, a palmist who worked under the name Chiro. Chiro was busy. His assistant, a man named Richard Harold Naylor, took the assignment instead. Naylor produced an article called What the Stars Foretell for the New Princess. It ran 3 columns wide. It sold papers. Gordon commissioned a weekly follow-up. Naylor's column ran under the title, Your Stars. Now here's the trick Naylor pulled that made the modern horoscope possible. Traditional astrology required a birth chart calculated for the individual at the exact hour and place of birth. It was labor. It could not scale to newspaper readership. Naylor solved the problem by dividing the sun's 360-degree path across the year into 12 equal zones of 30 degrees each. He named each zone after one of the classical zodiac constellations, and he wrote a block of prediction for every zone, keyed to your date of birth. That is your sun sign. That is Aries and Taurus and Gemini as you meet them in a newspaper column. Every horoscope in every paper afterward copied Naylor's format. Every astrology app on the audience's phone today, the ones that ping you about Mercury retrograde and remind you of your rising sign, descends from a Sunday Express column dated August 24th, 1930. But under Naylor's format, the underlying craft is unchanged. The craft is assigning meaning to the position of the sky at your birth. It is reading personality and fate from where the sun sat when you took your first breath. That is what chapter 8, verse 3 names, in 10 words, as Baraki-Jal's teaching. Tertullian recognized it around the year 200. Naylor packaged it in 1930. The app on the phone in the audience's pocket delivers it today. The teacher was bound. The lesson was permanent. The pattern is still real. The reading is still his. In my reading, chapter 8 of 1st Enoch is not really a list of crimes. It is a theory of civilization, and the astrology line is the strangest verdict in it. Every other craft the Watchers handed over has a plausible defense. You need metallurgy to farm. You need language for spells because ancient societies had no other way to talk about medicine. You need cosmetics for social ritual. The Watcher who taught you weapons at least gave you a way to defend the harvest. Baraki-Jal gave you nothing you could not have lived without. He read a fate that was not there. And of all the crafts, his is the one that survived the longest and spread the widest. And yet, one thing about the passage still refuses, at least for me, to sit straight. Look again at the muster roll of chapter 6. Baraki-Jal is 9th, Kokobel is 4th. Their names sit close together. Kokobel means star of God. Baraki-Jal means lightning of God. And then in chapter 8, the Charles rendering assigns astrology to Baraki-Jal and the constellations to Kokobel. But if you were an ancient Hebrew scribe reading the names cold, the star name should have carried the star teaching. Nickelsburg, in his 2001 commentary, suggests the tidy division of celestial crafts may reflect a later editorial pass over an older Aramaic stratum that partitioned these teachings less cleanly. I have not made up my mind about that. The name suggests lightning, but the assignment gives him the whole sky, which brings us to the question underneath this whole episode. If the pattern is real and the reading is his, which of the two is more dangerous depends on what you plan to do with it. That is the question the ancient scribe kept answering. That is the question every horoscope column is still answering. Next time we stay in the same verse, because Baraki-Jal is only half of what chapter 8 verse 3 names. The scribe puts Kokobel directly after him, the teacher of the constellations. The name literally means star of God. If Baraki-Jal handed us the reading, Kokobel handed us the map underneath. And when we look at what the Ethiopic and the Aramaic actually say about him, one detail in the older stratum does not agree with the later Ge'ez version. Mielik and Nickelsburg both flag it. We will walk through it next week, which raises the question I want to leave you with. Which do you think the ancient scribe was more afraid of? The map or the reading of it? Was he more afraid of the sky itself or of what a person claims to see in the sky? Tell me in the comments. I read them. If you enjoyed this one, give it a like. It genuinely helps the channel. And subscribing means you will not miss the next one. See you then.